I try, there's a new way. I'm gonna show you the tricks I know. Not getting tired of talking, so I made up a show right now. It's time that you made your mind up. And looking sounds a little bit strange. Everybody is talking. You need someone ready to change. I will fight like no other every day. I won't stop like the others. I will stay, 'cause it's the right time. I'm feeling alright. I'm flying higher. I'm ready to scream right now. Geeksvana. Don't tell me highlight. There's something you may like. Once I'm ready to fly. I'll tell her to do it right. So I'll tell her to do it right. Geeksvana. We're feeling alright. We're flying higher. We're gonna win tonight. We're here just for the audience. We're gonna show what you're going through. We wanna find you the perfect drone. There's no one else who can help you out. It's time that you made your mind up. And looking sounds a little bit strange. Everybody is talking. You need someone ready to change. I will fight like no other every day. I won't stop like the others. I will stay, 'cause it's the right time. I'm feeling alright. I'm flying higher. I'm ready to scream right now. Don't tell me highlight. There's something you may like. Once I'm ready to fly. I'll tell her to do it right. So I'll tell her to do it right. It's better. Feeling alright. We're flying higher. Gonna win tonight. It's better. It's better.
Hey everybody, welcome to Geeksvana Live. Thank you very much for joining us this Thursday evening, or of course it may not be evening. It certainly isn't where the tonight's guest is. Tonight we're going to be joined by YouTuber, engineer, journalist, publisher, TV presenter, and many other things, Bruce, otherwise known as xjet. Now, I hope that everybody that watches this channel is very aware that here at Geeksvana, we're very passionate about bringing our audience the whole picture, and not every side of the fence, because I feel like everybody in the RC and drone hobby should be on the same side of the fence. And I think sometimes it's good to hear opposing views. It's good to hear views that are different to your own, and that is always welcome here. Hopefully, I've seen people in the chat who I know directly disagree with some of the things I talk about and some of the things I say, and it's great to see you. And hopefully you guys keep returning, because we do have that discussion, we do have that debate, and tonight that's certainly something that I would like to see continued, frankly. So without further said, let's bring our guest in, shall we? It's Bruce. How are you, Bruce?
I'm good, mate. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thank you very much. I was just saying to the audience, thank you for joining us this evening. But of course, it's mid-morning, late morning for you.
Yeah, it's mid-morning o'clock, 10 o'clock, 10 or 4 minutes past, I think.
Very nice. I used to spend a decent amount of time in New Zealand, actually, because I was engaged to a Kiwi for a few years. So we used to hop down there every Christmas for a few weeks, and I do miss the place. Actually, it has a unique feel to that country. I hope it hasn't changed much in the last 10, 15 years.
Oh, everything changes, but you can't get in now because of the horrible malware.
Of course. Yes, indeed. Closed borders. But yeah, so thank you very much, first of all, for joining us this evening. I do appreciate it. I gave the long list of job titles and occupations, I suppose, that you've held over the years, because of course you have been at this a very long time, haven't you? You've been at this many decades now.
Yes, indeed. Don't let these youthful young looks fool you. Yeah, I think I flew my first model when I was probably 6 or 7 years old, and I've been doing it ever since, with a few gaps for things like family life and women and that sort of thing. But yeah, been pretty hardcore at it for most of my life.
That's cool. And I mean, we've seen everything from, flying the smallest whoop to you building jet bikes and pretty much everything in between, including missile projects and scrap heap challenge. And it's been a very varied career as well, hasn't it, for you?
Yeah, there's never been any lack of excitement, one would say. And of course, I'm always poking bears with sticks, which adds to the fun.
Always. do you actually remember what your first build was?
Yeah, it was a little balsa wood rubber powered thing with sticks of balsa wood with tissue paper and a rubber band and a propeller. You had to carve yourself from a block of balsa wood. Awesome. And that was it flew, but not very well. And of course, when something doesn't work, it's always an incentive to do it again, but do it better.
It is, but there's still that sort of early stages of building anything, and that gives you the bug as well, really, because when you see the thing getting put together, yes, it's nice that it flies at the end. Yes, it's nice that model or contraption does what it's supposed to do. But actually, part of the buzz is the build, of course, and actually just learning how these things go together. And then, of course, the next build's better. I mean, I've always found that. I haven't built drones yet myself, but that might be coming in 2022. I've had two manufacturers send me ready-to-fly FPV kits. So I think I'm going to have to take that long jump off the short pier that is FPV in 2022.
Yeah, then you'll find your camera drones will sit in the back of the wardrobe.
Well,
never be used again because it's just boring compared to FPV.
Yeah, I mean, I do have the DJI FPV drone, but I don't count that as FPV. I count that as something in between. Almost really, a lot of the time, it kind of feels like fixed wing flying when I'm flying that a lot of the time, actually.
Yeah, it's too automated.
I don't do much even in that manual mode, let alone any true FPV as such. But I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to dipping my toe in the water. I've always been hesitant a little bit because I've thought that I'm kind of someone that likes to go all in on things. Like YouTube, I've kind of gone all in and tried to do everything that I possibly can with it. And I feel like I'll be the same way with FPV, if that makes sense. So I feel like I'm going to have to know every little bit of it, and I've always been worried about going down that rabbit hole. But it's whenever you're on YouTube and in the drone space and you don't do FPV, it's always calling at you from the side, and then of course you've got your audience on the other side going, "You should try this. Come to the dark side."
The big thing about FPV drones are great because you take apart from the DJI, if you have a DJI drone, you don't have this advantage. But with the conventional FPV drones, freestyle and racing, you can smack them into anything and they don't break. It's once you've bought your gear and got yourself set up, it's a very low cost sport. A few propellers, maybe a motor on the odd occasion, but you can really have a good time. You don't have to, not that fear of crashing that we used to have with when we built our models out of balsa wood and tissue. They're almost indestructible. And that is an awfully empowering thing. You'll try things that you never thought you'd try before because the consequences of failing are so low.
Exactly. And it is something, again, that there is obviously my FPV friends do talk to me about the buzz that when you're trying to get better, you don't mind crashing because actually that crash has taught you something, and the next time you'll do something slightly different. And if you crash doing the same thing 20 times, the 21st time you'll pull that off and then you won't crash doing that anymore. And so that side of it does excite me. There's the old sort of build, fly, crash, repeat type side of things. So we'll see what 2022 brings. It might be a very short FPV career, especially at my age, but there we go.
Oh yeah, because you're so old, eh?
Indeed,
really
yeah.
Old.
I can't say that.
You'll need to subscribe to my beauty vlog to get some tips to make you look young like me.
Yeah, I'm not doing the clap press up thing. I have to say,
why not?
Because I think I'd be able to do about half, and I'm not sure you can actually count them in 0.5s. But there we go. It would just be lifting the arms and falling to the floor. What are your thoughts on GPS camera drones? Do you fly any at all yourself?
The only one I've got that has GPS is my DJI FPV drone, which I've flown a total of about 7 times because the damn thing, DJI said, here's the drone, it's yours, but you can't fly it unless we tell you can fly it. And I fly it in airfield. And even though I have all the necessary permissions and legally it's 100% straight, I have to jump through so many hoops and hurdles to actually arm the thing at the airfield. I just don't bother. It's just like, I've got better things to fly.
Blame you. No, I don't blame you. I mean, I have to say I have a lot of fun with that drone, and it's one of the things that, as a GPS pilot myself, a GPS drone pilot myself, camera drone pilot, the flying field at the club where I'm a member pretty much becomes very boring very quickly, of course, because once you've flown your DJI and Spy around this field 4 times, it's the same flight every time. So it's good for testing, and if I want to try out a new maneuver or a new recording maneuver to practice. But I have to say the FPV drone is great when it's just one location, because you can still have that bit of fun with it, zipping it around the field, etc. So yeah, it's awesome. So drone regulation. We'll get on to the bit that people want us to talk about, of course.
I love drone regulations. Carry on.
Is there a section of drone regulation that you support? Because I feel like a lot of people focus on your videos and your narrative and your discussions around the issues of drone regulations, and we could talk about those as well. But is there a side of drone regulation that you support as such?
Well, drone regulation is such an all-encompassing term. I still believe that there are just the 2 rules. There should be just the 2 rules. Do not endanger people, do not endanger third-party property, and everything else becomes advisory. There are means to that end. So you can go into great detail explaining, well, you can't do this, you can't do that. But when those rules are made by people who sit behind a desk, probably never flown a model aircraft or a drone themselves, and they're going to make these rules based on what they believe are best practice, they're never going to be good rules. And also, the more rules you make, the more loopholes you create, because you're trying to be too detailed. And as you get smaller and smaller detail, the gaps between the details grow. And it's easy. I can go out there today and I can endanger people's lives flying within the rules, because the rules allow me to do that. They're so fine detailed that the gaps are so big. Whereas if you simply fall back on those 2 key rules, don't endanger people, don't endanger other people's property, there is no way to endanger people or their property without breaking those 2 rules. So that we don't need this massive detail. That's my problem with the rules.
Okay, it's an interesting point, actually, because one of the things that I often have put to me as someone that talks about the UK drone rules quite a lot on his channel, and obviously puts out videos on how to follow them and that type of thing, is I kind of get people asking me questions from both sides of things. I either get people saying they had a problem with me because I did X, but actually I was under 400 feet, I was at the correct separation distance, I'd followed all these rules, but then they're still saying I was flying dangerously. And then the other side of the fence there of people that want to know every single minute part of it before they fly their drone. So I find that the rules, especially as we have them here in the UK, help to guide people along those routes. But then we do have things like Article 241, which is that sort of overriding rule that is very much like that. You should not endanger property. I think it's 240, which is the aircraft one, people, buildings, etc., that type of thing. So I agree with you in principle, but I also worry about what happens to the people that actually that is just too broad for. So be the people that will misunderstand that and will, do we not need further guidelines to narrow that down, basically? Do we not need to be able to say, yes, let's have those 2 main rules, but actually, does that mean I can fly near people? Does that mean I can fly in town centres, that type of thing?
Use the key word, guidance. You're talking guidance. Now, guidance is different to rules. But what they've tried to do is take that guidance and codify it into a set of rules, which I don't think it should be. It should be left as guidance. The 2 rules as such are immutable and they cannot be transgressed, whereas the rest of it is simply guidance. Sometimes it is safe to fly in some aspects, whereas other times it's not safe to do that. And a good example is on a couple of occasions I've been in discussions with CAA in New Zealand and said, well, why can't I do this? It's perfectly safe to do it, but against your rules. And they've said, in that case, we wouldn't enforce that rule. And I'm thinking, well, then the rule is kind of arbitrary. And if you're going to have a rule which you're going to enforce sometimes and not other times, depending on the situation, it's not a good rule. And so they're trying to build guidance into rules, and that's a conflict. Now, they also everyone's talking about education. We want you to register so we can educate you, which has never worked anyway. But so they are aware of the importance of education, but they're trying to make it into a rule set, and that fails because the other problem we've got is it's like in the UK. I don't know how you guys manage. The rules are so damn complex. There's reams of rules. How is anyone supposed to remember that? But if there's only 2 rules, you cannot go to a judge and say, I didn't know that rule, Your Honour, because you can always remember 2 rules. There's no defence against forgetting those.
No, indeed. And I do agree with that in general. And I do agree with that in terms of the right types of flyers and the right types of people, but I do feel like there are drone flyers out there that do need these other rules around them. I mean, certainly when I started, I needed that sort of infrastructure. I actually feel that the new UK drone rules, which have been in for this year, which I know Ian from Mads Tech would have been bending your ear about nonstop, is that I actually feel they're reasonable, because we've now got a situation where things like the Mini 2, we can actually fly that, and for the first time as a hobbyist, we can fly that in town centres, in congested areas, with zero separation from people, and we can even fly those over people. And there seems to have been very much a push in the UK towards the sub 250, saying, okay, these things aren't going to cause much damage if they do crash, and therefore the risk is so much lower. So I actually feel like our rules are heading in the right direction, ironically, because we do, of course, we have the air navigation order, which is that very complex piece of law. We then have CAP 722, which is the guidance on that law and the sort of the enforcement side of things, and then we have the drone code off the back of that. And it's really, if you follow those sort of 20 odd points of the drone code, then you're going to fly safe, you're going to fly legally. And I personally don't have an issue with that. But again, that might be because of my generation of drone flyer. It might be because I am a camera drone flyer, not an FPV flyer. So of course, so many of these rules are very easy for a GPS drone flyer to follow, such as spotters and that type of thing. Whereas of course, an FPV flyer, the first minute they start flying, they're already breaking a rule. So how are we going to expect them to follow anything else? I actually believe that there needs to be a system of regulation from the point of view of being able to guide people along the right way.
Yeah, but regulations shouldn't be used for guidance. Guidance is a completely separate thing. And because the whole idea, what we want to do is foster a culture of being responsible for your own actions. Now, you provide a wall of rules you can hide behind, and people don't have to take responsibility for what they're doing. Oh, I wasn't breaking the rules. It wasn't my fault. But if you take it a level higher and say, those are the two rules. If you endanger someone or their property, you've broken the rules, and you can't hide from that. And basically, you can have all the rules you like, but the people who are going to break the rules are going to break the rules. They become simply a method of apportioning blame after bad things have happened. And we've seen that. But the thing, you say that the UK rules are good, they've come, but they've given you back a tiny amount of what they've taken away. When I was young, you could do all those things. You could fly over people, you could fly and build up areas. They took it away, and then they're handing it back to you for an annual fee. I mean, seriously, this is like, this is how governments work quite often. They will take a freedom and sell it back to you as a privilege. And that in my book, you can't do that. That's not acceptable. And because I don't see the pile of bodies that were necessary, that created this need to withdraw those freedoms. And we have yet to see any of the regulators do a risk assessment. Because I say to them, prove the risk justifies these regulations, these restrictions, and that they won't produce a risk assessment. And the reason they won't, even though in most situations they require the operator to do their own risk assessment, they understand the importance of risk assessment. You've got to do a risk assessment, SORA, analyze the situation, come up with mitigations for possible risks, but they will not provide us with a risk assessment to justify their rule set, because they know that the risks are so low that if they did a proper assessment, their rules would not be justified, and they would be shooting themselves in the foot.
Do you think that's the reason why these things don't happen, or is it because actually it would be a very, very big, very difficult thing to do, frankly, to be able to assess the risk in every scenario, in every case use, the way that people following the rules and not following the rules would use those devices? Surely that's such a wide study that again, even that would end up falling between the ridges itself, and actually wouldn't really give you any usable data, because of course, how do you test it? How the tests that are coming in now over here in the UK and the EU, as far as our C ratings, C0 to C4, talking about how much how many joules is emitted when the thing hits the head and that type of thing, and its weight, etc. Those are obviously something which you can control, and I suppose you can set a risk to. Again, of course, I don't know whether anyone's actually, and I say I don't know, I know that no one's actually taken the time to say, okay, are these C0 to C4 drones, are they more or less dangerous than each other, etc. But I find the whole thing of having to prove that risk as well is difficult, when you think that for me, the risk of unlawful or rogue drone flight is more along the lines of what people are going to do from it, from the point of view of breaching privacy, from the point of view of breaching safe areas, that type of thing, and unwittingly encroaching as well, and that type of thing. So, because of course, although a Mini 2 is never going to take even a small helicopter out of the sky, if that helicopter and that drone do come into conflict, the helicopter has to do something about that, etc. So to me, that's already a risk, if that makes sense. The fact that you could potentially cause that aircraft to have to deviate, that type of thing, that's already a risk for me. So I suppose it depends on what you call risk. I don't ever think that drones are going to kill people and are going to be, a mass killer or anything else like that. But certainly our side of drones, the hobbyist, the consumer and prosumer side of things. So I don't think that is an issue. And I don't necessarily, in my opinion, feel that that's necessarily the direction the regulators are going in terms of trying to find the right balance between regulation and freedoms with drones, because I do feel that here in the UK we have, I don't feel like they've given us back something that we had before, because I understand, yes, before any of this was an issue, before even the old drone rules were in place and that type of thing, that yes, of course, it was the Wild West. You could fly them as high as you like, as far away as you like, that type of thing. And again, even when that was happening, there were no problems. But when you have greater and greater numbers of users, and when you look at the sheer amount of Mini 2s that are now sold, even just here in the UK now, and that are being registered, that's a lot of users. And I just think there is a overall risk with that many drone operators happening up and down the country that don't know the rules specifically enough. I feel they need more than just the 2 rules, personally.
Well, they need the 2 rules, and they need the guidance handbook, where they can look it up and see what's what. And that's the educational aspect of things. But you mentioned one thing there, privacy. It is not the purview of the civil aviation regulator to handle privacy. You have a privacy thing to do that. And this is another thing. Look at all these rules. Just about anything you can do with a drone that will endanger people is already a breach of some other law. Endangerment,
absolutely.
All these things. We do not need all these finely grained rules dealing specifically with drones. We have general law to deal with that, and so we only need the 2 overriding rules, and the rest is advisory. And if you do something, you can be just as easily done under the Crimes Act as you can under the Civil Aviation Act, because if you smash into someone's car, or if you hover over their pool and spy on them, you got the privacy things. We have this as another layer of rules on top of laws that already exist to prevent bad things happening, and we're just being over-regulated. I don't mind regulation, as I say, to a degree, but over-regulation is bad because it produces low levels of compliance, and therefore you lose your ability to control those people who are the problem element. A lot of people go, might as well be hung for a sheep as a lamb, and they'll just go all out because these rules are too hard, too complicated, too restrictive. I'm just going to do what I want to do. Now, of course, I would never say that myself, but other people do.
I do think that is a wider issue than anybody realizes, because I think as much as all of us talk about this on YouTube and everything else like that, and Facebook and Twitter and Insta is awash with people posting their videos, their drone videos, photos, and that type of thing, I think there is a much wider use space out there who at the moment, and I'm talking internationally, not any specific country, who just do not follow the rules, and they're not trying to be, they don't have an outlaw tattoo on their shoulder and ride big Harleys around, etc. Not that Harleys are outlaws, but anyway. Just trying to paint a picture. But I do think that there is quite a wide non-compliance out there at the moment, and I think it's a bigger thing than I think a lot of people realize, because there are just so many more drone and RC flyers who just don't post online, basically, who just fly for their own reasons and enjoyment, etc. And yeah, it is. I think it's a wider problem, but I do. For me, I struggle. I agree with you that it would be a fantastic system if we had the 2 rules and then everything else is guidance. And I think that's good, because then actually, if you don't follow that guidance, you're more than likely going to trigger one of those 2 rules. But I almost feel like, certainly here in the UK with things like the CAP 722, which is the guidance on the rules, I feel like we're almost there already. But because if you breached any of those rules, you're only really going to come under one of a couple of issues as far as what you'll actually get prosecuted for. So I feel like that the 2 arguments are closer together than necessarily a lot of people realize.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because I think the rules seem to be made with the perception that all drone owners want to do bad things. I get the overwhelming feeling that the regulators think we're all trying to go out there and do bad things when we're not.
Yeah.
Because if you look at Canada, in Canada there are no prescriptive rules for sub 250. No prescriptive rules. There are two rules that I've mentioned are the only rules that apply. How many incidents have you heard of in Canada where sub 250 have caused a problem? They haven't. People are generally responsible and they'll do the right thing. They don't want to risk their valuable drone to doing crazy things. And if you give people an opportunity to be responsible and behave responsibly, they will do so. But if you treat them like idiots and you try and explain to them, like regulators do, oh, if you're flying FPV, you don't have enough situational awareness, you've got to have a spotter. When no FPV flyer without a spotter has ever brought down an airplane, but almost every week, manned aircraft crash into each other because they lack situational awareness, but they don't have to have a spotter in the passenger seat. And this challenges this. They're treating us like idiots. We can see this. You can't treat us like morons. We can see the reality. And if you're going to lie to us about what constitutes acceptable levels of situational awareness, why should we have any respect for your rules?
Okay, yeah. I mean, and again, as I say, I can understand that argument. I don't personally agree with it because I think things like, you know, the spotter rule, as someone that's only put goggles on for the first time this year, it's actually one of the rules that I've always been very careful about talking about from the point of view that, you know, I'm not someone that uses it particularly heavily, so I don't feel like it would be a bit like me talking about motorcycle rules. I've never ridden a motorcycle in my life. I'm not about to tell them how it should or shouldn't happen in a safe way. But my first reaction has always been since using the goggles is actually I felt like I had more situational awareness when I was inside the goggles than I do when I'm flying a camera drone. When I'm flying my camera drone, I'm worried about where it is in relation to trees and buildings and that type of thing. I'm looking down at my screen, looking back up, and of course, there's always I'm not a young man. I'm not, you know, I'm not an old man, but I'm not a young man. I wear glasses, and there's always there's always that time where I have to readjust myself from looking at my bright screen back up to the sky to find the drone and that type of thing. And whereas, of course, when I have my goggles on my FPV drone, I'm always in the aircraft. I get instinctively know where all the controls are, that type of thing. And especially with the DJI FPV drone, it will just stop if there's a problem that I can then take the goggles off and resolve. But I always see personally the issue with the spotter side of things is the people on the ground actually more than it being an aircraft to aircraft situation. Because again, of course, FPV being flown below tree cover, etc. If there's another aircraft down there, then there's a bigger problem than your drone being there, frankly. But I get concerned when we're talking about not having spotters from the point of view of, you know, 5-6 inch quads, which are powerful, fast little beasts, tearing around at lower levels when there are people around you. Again, there's always the answer. Where are the problems? You know, where is the concern? You know, where are the, you know, the dozens of dogs
the other thing
every year by these things.
The thing that's important there is, again, it's personal responsibility. Like I fly in the parks and I've been rumored to fly without a spotter, but I do not fly in areas where there are people. And I fly at times of the day when people aren't around, and I don't fly 5-inch quads in that situation. I fly in a way that preserves the safety of other people and so forth. And the thing that really annoys me is it's obvious these rules have been written by people who've never done this. Because one of the things that I use primarily when I'm flying FPV is my ears. I can hear people walking along the path. I can hear approaching aircraft. And if you're stuck in the cockpit of a Cessna 172 and you're flying along, you can hear nothing but the engine or your radio. So you have less situational awareness. You can't see down because there's a floor to your aircraft. You can't see up because there's the wing. You can't see, you know, anywhere. You've got a tiny little area of situational awareness visual and no audio awareness. You don't need a spotter in the passenger seat. And so it's a case of common sense, and that's what I rely on. And if we can get across to people that ultimately you are the one responsible, not the people that make the rules. You can hide behind rules if you want to, but ultimately we need to say, no, rules are there to give you the two rules are there for you to be responsible. The others are for guidance, and you've got to take it on the chin to do what's right. And that, I think, if you give people that, you treat them like adults, you treat them with respect, they will show that respect back. The regulators, the rules are always the only time people comply with rules is if they respect the rules and they see the purpose of them. If they don't respect the rules or the issuing authority, they just ignore them, and that's where we are.
Yeah, but that assumes competence of operator as well, of course. So yourself, myself, we genuinely don't want to, and I don't think anybody, very few people actually want to have a laugh by crashing their quad into someone. And so I don't think that's an issue at all. But
unless it's Ron or Gordon.
Yeah, yeah. Xjet fans will know what that means. And yeah, it is down to operator as well, because I've met people who would count themselves as highly qualified drone pilots, that people that have so this certificate, that certificate, and XYZ permissions, and fairly substantial careers behind them, and I don't think they're very safe. I don't think they're a very safe flyer, and I would say that would be my fear from the FPV side of things, from the point of view that yes, you are responsible. Yes, you are very alert, but actually not every FPV flyer will be. And we had an FPV debate a few weeks ago on the channel, which was where is the future of FPV? And one of the points that was put there actually is that they don't feel that actually there is enough responsibility in the hobby and that type of thing, which I found interesting. But I suppose my overall issue when it comes to the spotter thing is, as I say, it's not situational awareness in the sky, it's the situational awareness around you for the various different types of.
Well, you know how you fix that. You know how to fix that from a regulatory perspective. You say a spotter doesn't have to be used. A spotter may be dispensed with when it is safe to do so. Because manned aviation, the pilots get a lot of discretion. They get to decide whether something's safe or not safe based on their own observation, because someone sitting behind a desk is never going to make the accurate decision that someone on the spot is going to make. So they show respect to the pilots by saying, well, you can make this decision. So we're going to say when it is safe to do so is included in a rule. We don't have any of those. None of our rules say when it is safe to do so. And that's showing the regulators are saying, we don't trust any of you people. We think you're all out to kill people and invade their privacy and blow stuff up. And if someone's going to come to me with that attitude, I'm going to say, I'm sorry, but you're not qualified to make rules. You don't do what we're doing. You don't understand what we're doing. You have no awareness of the factors involved. You cannot dictate to me from behind a desk because I just asked the question, show me the bodies.
Yeah, no, indeed. And I can see 100% the point of that. I mean, as Jackrabbit FPV is saying, everyone's opinion of safe is different as well, of course. So there's always that. But again, interpretation is different. If the drone rules tell us to fly safely, then that's the same argument there. What is safe? That will change between different people.
We get to make that decision on the road, though. When we're driving our car, you may only overtake when it is safe to do so. We don't say, you can only overtake. No, we give people the discretion to make that decision. Why can't drone flyers, given the very low risk profile of what we're actually doing, why can't we be given a bit of discretion?
Yeah, because the sort of oxymoron side of the whole FPV and the spotter side of things, which is why I think I constantly challenge whenever I speak to our contact at CAA, or not our contact, but the communications department at CAA, or anybody, anything to do with regulation. I always say that the thing we need to solve ASAP is the spotter issue, because we have this sort of oxymoron where we're saying you must have a spotter to fly. Everyone knows that 99.5% of FPV flights are done without a spotter, yet we don't have the issues, yet we don't have, but of course the oxymoron part of that is that they say, well, we insist on having spotters and we don't have problems with FPV. Well, actually, you don't have problems, but the vast majority of flights are happening ignoring that first rule. And there is something which bugs me, the fact that it's a rule that is important, and we need to find a way of it working. We need to find a way, and very much like your suggestion of actually saying that you need a spotter until safe, and unless unsafe, and that type of thing. I could see that working, but we need to find something, because these FPV flyers are going out to fields, and the first 30 seconds of their flight, they're already breaking one of the first rules. And
as I say, these people then think, well, might as well be hung for a sheep as a lamb. Why should I bother following any of the rules? And the respect for the rules is lost. The rules become powerless because all rules are they are optional. You've got a choice. It's up to you to decide whether to follow them or not. The only way regulators get any level of compliance is by gathering the respect of the people they're regulating, producing a rule set that is a good match to the risks. But if you haven't defined what the risks are through your risk assessment, you can't do that from behind a desk in an ivory tower. And when you look at the rules, how much of the rules set out there has been created by people who are actually doing what we do? Now, recreational model flying is over 85% of all the unmanned aerial activity in the skies. Yet we get a tiny, tiny amount of say. Our rules are made by people with commercial interests and big business and things. So they're never going to be a good fit. And until they're a good fit, until they come to us and say, well, okay, let's sit down, let's show us how these things work. We'll sit behind the goggles and we'll do this, until they interface and engage with us. And I'm not just talking to a few representatives from the group, but actually get right out there. Then there's never going to be a good fit.
Drone advisory committees. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, Dan.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry to anyone that sits on those things. We know you're doing your absolute best, but it's a bizarre thing. It's interesting you say that, actually, because and as I say, sometimes people think, two people like ourselves wouldn't get on and wouldn't be able to find viewpoints that we're similar on, when actually all we want is a free, safe hobby, but perhaps we have different views on how that's achieved. And actually, when you're talking about people getting involved in the regulation side of things that are knowledgeable of the hobby, of the RC hobby, and of the wider drone hobby, that there is actually quite a good example of that in the UK, which in actual fact was renewed today. Have you heard of Article 16?
Yeah, I've seen that was renewed. Yeah.
Which again, I speak to many people in the industry. I have a lot of contacts in the UK drone hobby and industry. And when the Article 16 authorization was first given, there was actually quite a lot of shock. People were like, "Well, no, you're not going to be able to do that because these new rules will stop X, Y." No. This actually says if you're in a park or something like that, you can just fly. And actually, what that has shown is, again, obviously Simon Dale, FPV UK, the superstar that he is, again, someone extremely knowledgeable in both manned and unmanned aviation, has put his knowledge and his experience to gaining this special authorization. But what they've also done, which I think is very, very clever, is they've followed that up. They've said to their members, okay, we need you to report when you have crashes, because we need to show that nothing happened from those crashes, and say, actually, yes, we had X hundred crashes, X thousand crashes from members this year, and number of injuries, 0, number of property damage, 0, etc. And therefore, it's actually building a safety record. And they've now had the permission renewed for another year, which is absolutely fantastic. That was released by the FPV UK news office today, and in actual fact, the Article 16's got a little bit wider. So now the GPS drone flyers are able to use some automation as long as it's not moving in the air, because the original one said things like you couldn't use return to home, which is bizarre for something that's trying to keep you safe, isn't it? It's sort of return to home.
I can understand it. I can understand that, because I would never fly a quad like a DJI in an area where, like, I'd never fly one at the airfield, because imagine the following scenario, and I always do a rolling risk assessment when I'm flying it. At the airfield, of course, you've got to do that. And I was thinking, if I was flying my DJI FPV drone at the airfield and an aircraft decided to come in and land, and suddenly my DJI FPV drone went into return to home and I'm powerless to do anything, it could fly right into the path of that aircraft. Once you lose control of a drone, that's a risky situation. And that's why I only fly drones that don't have GPS and flight controllers that do any form of automation. Even my fixed wing FPV, I don't use flight controllers. I fly bareback, as it's called, because it's the safest way.
Yes, and if you look at incidents that have happened here in the UK, we had that one this year, where a professional operator with a very large drone, it wouldn't respond to return to home, etc. And actually
drifted downwind.
And actually hit a house. And the operators had never taught themselves how to fly in ATI mode.
It's like the police when they didn't get a GPS lock.
Well, yeah, indeed.
Have you noticed something? Let me bring this up. Now, we're told that we need all this, rules and risk assessment, all sort of crap. But you look at the only really big incidents that have occurred in the world with drones are police related. In Canada, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police flew into their own damn helicopter. In the USA, the police flew into a light aircraft that was landing.
Yes,
it's like the police. In the UK, the police have flyways. If the police, this is how distorted the regulators' view of drone operators are.
But is that because those ones are reported? whereas actually there are incidents happening all the
I
time.
think
that
any
aren't
drone that
reported.
hits a manned aircraft is going to be reported.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah, indeed.
But I'm talking because
Canada have an amazing record and achievement record at managing to do that. I mean, literally setting up specific environments to test these things, and they still manage to get the things to connect. Is
it happened in the US as well. Happened in the USA.
I honestly don't think I could with a camera drone. I don't think I could catch a helicopter, even if it was just it would just be. Actually, trying to hit the thing would be a challenge, in my opinion. So the fact that they managed to do that was astonishing, frankly. But I do think there is an aspect of it, the fact that those incidents, whether they're with other aircraft or flyaways, that type of thing, they are reported. So of course they become headline news. Whereas flyaways and the consumer market, that type of thing. So I do understand what you mean from the headline point of view. But I think it's not even
a headline thing. I don't think there'd be a single collision between a drone, recreational otherwise, with a manned aircraft that wasn't reported. So,
yes, agreed.
And if you look at it, the police are leading the way. They're right up there. But they're supposed to have all the right training, all the right gear, operating under the same rules, but they can't get it right. So why should we get so heavy on recreational flyers who are not the risk? And this is the thing you're saying. We're proving, how safe this is. We've proven this over the last 80 years. Surely it's the job of the regulator to come in and say, well, 80 years you've done it safely. We need to prove that it's no longer safe. So here's our risk assessment proving the risk is this high, and this is why we justify our rules. They've dodged that step. Even in normal lawmaking, you have to prove there's a need for a law before you can pass a law into effect. But they've sidestepped that. There's no proof that they need this stuff. It's all what if. And remember, for how many years have we been told if a drone hits a helicopter, the helicopter will crash, people will die. Now, we've had several instances of drones hitting helicopters. Nobody's even been injured. And they've said, if a drone hits an airline, it'll crash and people will die. We've had a couple of instances where it's alleged that drones have hit airliners, not properly evidenced. It's all bullshit. They're just making this stuff up and creating a fear, uncertainty, and doubt to justify a rule set that we're finally discovering now is not so much based on safety as security and commercial imperative. And that's dishonest.
Yeah, well, I know exactly where you're coming from, because again, especially with the FAA, they've suddenly, well, not suddenly, but over a few of their releases over the last few years, have dropped the safety word more and more as they go along, and they now talk about security and other issues and things, and it is a clever old tactic in PR terms, frankly. But I don't think, though, that you could, as much as I agree with you from what you were saying regarding collisions with consumer drones and manned aviation, the two don't mix, and the two shouldn't mix. And
exactly. Let me just butt in for a moment.
Okay.
This is why I've always said one of the biggest safety things we can have is vertical separation. So given that the aviation regulators now recognize that below 400 feet is a completely different climate to that it was 10 years ago. There are a lot of unmanned aircraft below 400 feet. Why are they not enforcing the sub 500 foot, no manned aircraft below 500 feet unless landing and taking off or operating in a designated low flying area? And why aren't they adding that to the rule sets, enforcing it, chasing it up? They're not. They're trying to, it's like us. Drone flyers are like pedestrians. We have our own little area up to 400 feet. We should be on there. We shouldn't have to worry about some guy in a car driving up on the footpath and not going to save her. But the regulators refuse to deal with that situation.
And I do see that more and more, and I do get very frustrated. Particularly, actually, I don't know why, but it's very difficult to take. When I look at your arguments and the side of the arguments that I don't agree with in terms of approach, I find it easier to defend it from the point of view of the UK CAA and our drone rules and that type of thing. When I look at huge organisations like the FAA, I sort of sit there thinking, oh no, well he's not about to say that. He's not about. Oh no, he did, and that concerns me, because that's obviously a very large regulator that the world follows. If the FAA do something, everyone else thinks, oh, okay, well, it worked in America. It worked in America, as in they managed to get it through in America. So let's do that. Things like the remote ID coming up, where they're saying they're going to identify where the person is stood, etc. We both saw and made videos on that absolutely astonishing public statement that the FAA representatives made, of basically saying, if it becomes a problem, we'll do something about it then, but until then, contact your local police. It was an utterly bizarre situation. So I do see that, but I think I do think there is a middle ground. I think there is a middle ground between saying, okay, here's the tool, rules and guidance, and actually needing some regulation in between there, because I see enough flights on YouTube that I feel are unsafe. I feel that they are risking damage to people or property, etc., that type of thing. And I feel the regulations curb too many of those flights happening.
That's interesting though, because regulation obviously hasn't stopped people doing that.
Well, I feel like it's curbed it. I feel like if we didn't have the regulation, there'd be a lot more of that. I feel like people would look at those flights.
Do you think so?
And they'd say,
if you put,
honestly,
obviously people are not breaking the rules because they realise that they don't want to endanger people. I think that if you show people respect, they'll show you respect back from a regulatory perspective.
100% agree.
How many of us drive drunk? I don't drive drunk because it's a rule that I can see the very valid reason for, and it saves lives, and therefore I comply with that. Not because I fear getting a fine or losing my license or going to jail. It's because I don't want to kill people. And I think 99.9% of people are the same. And if you can educate them and show them why they shouldn't do something for the greater good, they won't do it. But you treat them like criminals already, and that's how they'll respond.
Yes. I agree with you to an extent. I really do, and I agree with the principle of that. But I don't know whether that survives contact with the wider user, with the wider user. Actually, some people whose sense of danger, whose sense of what is safe, is well beyond, is well past what any reasonable person would have. And actually, I do honestly believe, this is just my opinion, that if we didn't have the drone regulations we have in the UK, I think we would have had a lot more incidents, and I think we would have had a lot more issues, because there are some channels that do fly flagrantly beyond the rules, and I think if everybody or a lot more people did the same thing, then we would start to have significant issues.
Well, again, I'd raise Canada. The sub 250 regime in Canada, it hasn't resulted in a great deal of problems and people going out doing crazy, stupid things, because we've got to also recognize that we're flying small recreational toy drones, and they're not
which we have here as well. Which we have here as well. When they finally, please finally issue our C labels, we're going to be able to have all of these toy drones, and very much like the starter kit that I was talking about, the FPV drones. That's never going to hurt someone. I could fly that at full throttle into a baby, which I'm not going to test, by the way.
Come on, do it.
and it's going to do nothing. And thankfully, here in the UK, that will get a C0 mark, which means I can fly over people, I can fly near crowds, I can do all sorts of things with it that previously under the old rules it would have been, no, you can't do that because it is a drone. Just the fact that it's a drone means that you can't do these things with it.
But that's another point, though. Hang on, let me just butt in again. We're talking drones, but this applies to model aircraft. Model aircraft isn't a drone. I mean, technically, under the definitions, it might be, but there's a huge difference between a quadcopter and a fixed wing. So why do we have one rule set to suit them all? It's because the regulators don't have a bloody clue what they're doing.
Well, and one of the things that we have DMARES here in the UK, the Drone and Model Aircraft Education Scheme, which is our drone registration, even though you actually register the operator, not the drone. But anyway, I suppose they call it that so people know this is drone registration, so people know what it is. And it does frustrate me, especially as a member of the BMFA, and I'm at a local club of extremely responsible flyers who have been doing this thing, the RC hobby, for decades and decades and decades and decades. And we're talking about 3D flyers and scale heli flyers, etc., who really, really know their stuff and have had zero problems, because of course a lot of the time they're flying in one location. They might go to a park to test hover or something they've changed or something like that. And it does frustrate me that the guy who has been doing it for 40 years and is literally building a scale Apache next to me has to follow exactly the same rules that my Inspire has to, or that even my DJI Mini 2 does. That's always been a little bit of a bugbear of mine, that I similarly to the fact that I think there's actually room, and I put this forward on the FPV debate that we had a few weeks ago. I feel like there's room for different rules for camera drones to FPV drones. I kind of feel like there's a car versus motorcycle argument there, from the point of view that we could have just a slight deviations from some of the rules to suit those two disciplines. I wholeheartedly feel that in terms of RC, especially local clubs. I do think people within a BMFA club, that type of thing, especially in one of their environments, there should be no registration for those vehicles and that type of thing, because I just don't think those aircraft, because I just don't think it's required. So no, we do agree on that side of things, that the all-encompassing side of things and the way they've thrown everything in the same bag globally is wrong. But as I say, and I know that with the sub 250 thing in Canada, they haven't had the issues, and very much we've got the same thing here in the UK. We're coming to the end of our first year. And I know we've had lockdowns and COVID and everything, so you can argue there haven't been as many flights, but we've sold a lot of Mini 2s in the country this year because the sub 250 side of things is so open in real terms. Hello, Mrs. Xjet. was that a rare appearance on?
yeah, cameo. Yep.
Yeah, indeed. So yes, and it's something that I almost feel like people want to protect in the UK now as well, because we have these freedoms with the sub 250 gram drones. But I do think that if we didn't have the regulations we have here in the UK, which is the only regulation system that I can personally talk about from an experience point of view, I think we would have a lot more problems. I think that we would have, because even the people who are breaking them and knowingly breaking them are doing so carefully, if that makes sense. And I think a lot more people would copy these rogue flyers if there weren't the rules and the punishments to back that up. But that's just a personal opinion.
But I disagree. That's great, because we've got two diverging opinions here. That makes for a more exciting discussion.
It does.
Because even this whole thing of registration, I said when they just, we're going to bring out registration, £4 million to put a Raspberry Pi on someone's bedside table and put, a couple of, maybe 100,000 names on it. £4 million? Seriously? What are you joking? And what have you got for that? They were supposed to make sure that people were responsible. How many lives has that saved? What dollar figure in property damage has that prevented? Where is the justification for that expenditure and the imposition? Because you're now putting people on an offenders list. You look what happened to Gatwick. Someone said they saw a drone and then they raced around to a neighbour's place, grabbed these poor couple and arrest them. Imagine once if this happened again. It was more than
that one couple. It was more than that one, because in fact, of course, Richard Ryan was also interviewed as well.
Yeah, that's right. He was. Yeah.
And I'm not in any way, shape, or form, as those words left my mouth. There's a difference to getting a card through the door saying, "Would you mind to pop down and have a chat with us?" and armed police kicking your door in. So I'm not minimising their experience whatsoever. But yes, no, I do understand that. But I don't feel like I feel like we jump from needing regulation and there being a reason to have regulation because there is risk and there is potential danger, to jumping to it hasn't killed anybody far too quickly, if that makes sense.
Regulation should be commensurate to risk. There should be a relationship between risk and regulation. You don't over-regulate something, because what really concerns me the most is the future of the hobby. I mean, when I was a kid, I got given that little kit set for a rubber-powered model airplane, and it got me started in a thing. And within a few years, I was building 52-inch free flight model aircraft with a diesel motor on the front, turning an 8-inch flesh cleaving prop, and I'd take it down to the schoolyard and fly it, and then I'd spend an hour getting it out of the trees. I had friends would go down to the park and fly control line while there were ladies with prams and dogs and kids running around. No one died. No one got injured. Everyone. In fact, one of the first times that I saw another model aircraft was I was at the park. I was really young. I must have been before school age, maybe, I don't know, maybe after, but I was walking through the park with my mother and I heard a noise, and there was a group of people flying a control line plane in the middle of the park, and there was a crowd standing around the edge, probably about a foot from the whizzing model, and we went over and had a look, and it was fantastic, and I thought, oh, this is so exciting. You're not going to see that anymore. Because, and if you don't have that, you don't get young people getting excited and passionate about it and saying, I want to get into this. We're going to create
although of course we do here in the UK, but because in actual fact the control line's just been added to the Article 16, but I understand exactly what you're saying, and that is actually one of the things that I raised in the FPV debate, and that I raise quite often, is the future of the hobby. And if you present hurdles, if you put too many hurdles in the way, and people say, "Oh, this is only £9," and I do feel that, actually I do feel it is only £9 a year to register my drone, but actually it is to someone getting into the hobby. Either a very young person who doesn't have much money, or even someone older that's just like, actually, it's £9 for this. Now I need insurance. Now I need to join.
But in the UK, do you still not have to have a non-miner as the operator, or as the owner? You got there's two parts to it, isn't it? There's the operator and so do you have to have someone who's over? How does a 9-year-old get on?
Yeah,
if their parents aren't interested.
A 9, yeah, absolutely, and that is a significant issue. It's also a significant issue in much wider terms, because people say, "Oh, it's a hobby; they'll go do another hobby," but actually, that's a whole other argument that I'd love to have with someone one day, because you should be able to do the hobby you want to do. But actually, it's the wider side of things from the point of view of who those people become and what this specific, and especially the RC hobby, more than just flying camera drones, but what that sparks in people and the interest level and what they go on to do. I know we have all the famous things of this astronaut used to do, used to build rockets in the park and that type of thing and XYZ, but actually it's there an awful lot. If you look at a lot of biographies from engineers, from people who have really excelled and really innovated, they will often talk about sitting in their bedroom as a young child, whittling away, designing away, improving something, buying a model XYZ, putting it together and improving it. And yes, I am significantly concerned as far as the how we solve things from the point of view of actually getting young people into the hobby without the hurdles. And as you say, the fact that you then have to have an adult to sign to say that they own your device. A lot of parents will look at that and think, that's a little bit too much hassle. Here's a ball, now go play.
Yeah, or it's too risky because you get a fine and we don't know what you're doing.
That's right.
Because my parents just let me go and do my thing, and no one got hit. The risk is grossly over, because model flying now is much safer than it was when I was a kid. As I said, I had a 52-inch model with a diesel motor on the front, and it wasn't light foamy, and it was free flight. I had no control at all, and I would let it go to circle around the town and land in someone's backyard. That was acceptable, and people, that's great. He's outdoors enjoying, it's a good, healthy outdoor hobby. These days, you're flying a perfectly safe model with state-of-the-art radio control, and it seemed to be a risk to everybody.
I think we could possibly one thing that we would probably agree on is that the perception, and an audience, I'm saying perception here because my audience is vastly camera drone flyers. The perception is that it's the camera drone flyers' fault that we're getting so much regulation. Again, that's pure, from a perception point of view. I don't think we ever that we would sit here and say there's ever been an issue or a perceived issue with the RC hobby. Is it actually then the reason that you have, because again, and perhaps one of the reasons why I don't think my local BMFA club should have as many rules put on them as I should, is because they are expert. They've built these things. They know these. They know exactly what these guys can take off, and they hear a little vibration and they say, "Oh, it's XYZ needs replacing, or this needs tightening, or XYZ." Just from the listening to a vibration, which always astounds me, frankly. But then obviously someone like myself, who is a camera drone hobbyist or operator, the drone does so much of the work for me. So therefore my knowledge to put that aircraft in the air is so much lower. And an average person now can just obviously go onto Argos or Amazon or whatever they want to do. Other shops are available. Order a Mini 2, have that come through and take off and fly it. Whereas of course, even with a self-fly FPV kit, like the ones I've had sent through, there is still a learning curve for me to be able to do any kind of damage with those things, or get into any kind of risk with those things. So do you think that perhaps then the fact that these things are so automated and easy to use in comparison to the earlier hobby is part of the issue from the point of view that anyone can pick these things up and fly them?
Yeah, a lot of people do blame camera drones and DJI in particular for this malaise. But I don't know that I totally agree with it, because it's just a tool, and it's really down to what people do. And there's always going to be bad apples in every barrel, and it doesn't matter whether you give them a drone or a screwdriver or a knife or a gun, they're going to do bad things. And you can't blame the tool for the results that occur. It's a psychology thing. And I think it's great, camera drones, but the things, camera drones are so removed from model flying, the hobby of traditional hobby of model flying, that this thing that annoys me most is that the regulators think we'll have one set of rules, and it's completely different, because we've seen that in the past hobbyists have formed into clubs. They're responsible, they police themselves, they have national bodies. There's no national body for camera drones. There's very little self-policing for camera drone operators. They don't often, they just operate in isolation. They're not part of a group or anything. So it's a totally different culture. It's totally different technology, totally different craft. Why are we trying to use the same set of rules on these two different disparate groups? Because regulators are lazy.
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree with the first part of what you said there. From the point of view that and in actual fact, I've just done a video showing what you can do to earn money with your Mini 2 here in the UK if you want to earn a bit of cash on the side type thing, because we've got rid of that whole thing of having to have a formal qualification just because you're flying there. The flight should be the risk, which I completely agree with. And actually, one of the things I said in that at the start of that video is actually I think a lot of people who are going to be watching this, because I said this this is a video if you're a hobbyist and you want to earn money, but actually you probably don't even see yourself as a hobbyist, as a Mini 2 owner, and I think there are a lot of people out there now like that, and I think that is a growing audience, and that to me again raises the need to at least be able to put those people through a basic flyer ID test, although of course with the Mini 2 you don't actually need that at the moment in this country, ironically, but to have that basic knowledge and to have the drone code, etc., which is enforceable in law and not just pure guidance. I think that is important because the audience that we're now bringing into drones is so much wider. It's no longer just an enthusiast that's going to automatically be responsible because they have been. And I completely take on board what you're saying, because with my local BMFA group, I wasn't even with a camera drone. I had a Parrot camera drone, which of course is completely autonomous from the point of view that, I feel like I'm flying it, but of course if I let go of the controls, it's just going to sit and hover and land itself when the battery goes out. I still wasn't allowed to fly that alone at the field until I'd passed a certain couple of little tests that they gave me, just so that I knew, and again, so they knew I didn't fly my 300 Parrot drone into their 4,000 pound RC full scale helicopter or something is obviously part of it. But until they know that you're safe. And that to me is part of where I think the regulation makes sense to me, from the point of view that I look at the drone code and I look at the flyer ID and I think, okay, if someone has learnt enough to pass that test, then actually they know enough about things that they're probably going to be responsible. Does that make sense?
It does to a degree, but again, I think we've got to quantify the risks involved. There's a risk with everything, but I can go out there and I can get a 450-gram football and I can kick it just about anywhere I want to without any regulation control. Once it leaves my boot, it's totally beyond my control. If it hits someone in the head, it's going to give them a bruise. If it hits a window, it'll break it. There's no regulation on that. But if I take my 251-gram drone, which I have full control over, and I fly it, it's going to cause less damage. It's less of a risk, but there's so many rules associated with that. Yet the risk profile of the two things weighs in favor of the drone, lower risk than the football. How many people die or are badly injured in rugby games every year? Or soccer. How many people are badly injured and die in drones? None. It's all about making rules proportional to risk.
Yes, I have a friend who has a basketball GIF of a basketball hitting someone in an audience member in the face, and whenever someone talks about this, and whenever I post, he's a friend of mine, but he isn't so warm and fuzzy towards the rules, and he just posts that. He doesn't even put any words. He just posts that because, of course, you could get far more injured attending a basketball game than you could being around someone flying a sub 250 drone. But you see, that's also where I suppose if we were having this debate under the old UK drone rules, I think I would have not more sympathy towards it, because it's not about having sympathy, but I think I would be more towards your side of the field. And I don't want it to be I don't feel like we're on different sides of the fence. I think we're in the same field. We're just perhaps waving at each other and throwing things at each other from different sides of that field. But I feel like the new UK drone rules are actually moving back towards being more sensible from the point of view of the sub 250. There's a lot you can do with it. You've got the Article 16, which means I could take my Inspire and fly that in a park within 15 meters of people. And it's also,
I think that's a terrible rule. Inspires are way dangerous. I would never fly an Inspire within 15 meters of somebody in a park.
Yes,
it's a terrible rule.
Once you've carried out the risk assessment, etc., and of course taken.
So what you're saying is
it's coming back the right way. I think is what I'm saying.
So it's coming back to my
in the right circumstances. Well, yes, but which is very much what I was saying. That actually, I think with the complex air navigation order, you then dial that down into the CAP 722, and then into the drone code. But I feel like there's only ever really a couple of things that the UK CAA are really pushing from the point of view of actually being safe and responsible with your drone. But because there is such a wide user base and because there is such a wide type of person that could possibly pick up one of these things and fly them, they have to be in the form of set rules and with punishments behind them to ensure people follow them. Because I honestly feel like, and we all see the videos out there of people flying miles and miles away with their camera drones and that type of thing, and sometimes fairly significantly sized camera drones over towns and that type of thing. I don't feel that is safe. I don't feel that is something that should be copied. And I do feel like the fact that we have, at the moment, I feel like sufficient drone rules in the UK, so please don't give us any more. I do feel like that a lot of people won't copy that because they feel like they're going to be prosecuted. And I feel like without that level of regulation, we would have a lot more rogue drone flight, and then the hobby would get killed off anyway.
Okay, so we've established there is a risk, but I can't understand why the regulators aren't focusing on the bigger risk. For example, this week in South Africa, someone crashed an RV7 into a person's gate because they were flying and their motor stopped and they were over a suburb and it crashed onto the road, a cul-de-sac, smacked into their gate. Luckily, nobody was hurt. There are plenty of instances where manned aircraft flying over built-up areas crash and people in the aircraft and on the ground die, right? So we've proven that flying your drone over a built-up area, and there may be a risk, but it's nothing like the risk of flying a manned aircraft. Yet we don't see the aviation regulators looking at how can we reduce the risk of these things? Should we perhaps not allow manned aircraft to fly over built-up areas? Because although it may be inconvenient, it's just not safe for them to do so. We have the bodies to prove it. Yet we can't do this with a drone because it might fall and break someone's flowers in their backyard.
Do you think that there's an element, and I have wondered this, do you think that there is an element there from the point of view of when things have happened, from the point of view that, if aeroplanes were as new as drones were, then actually we would have a very different regulatory approach to those. But because they've been around for such a long time, we're used to them. It isn't a fantastical thing to see a 737 flying past your house, but it's still quite unusual to see a Mini 2 zipping over your house.
They've just made the rules proportionate to risk with manned aviation. There's a risk, people die, we accept that. It's like driving in a car. You get in your car, you could be killed, but you don't stay at home and go, oh, it's too dangerous, because the risk and the rewards are balanced and the rules are proportionate to risk.
I'm not very good with flying. I've become a lot better recently, actually, but yes, I've historically had a fear of flying.
We've got to accept that everything we do in life carries a level of risk, and we regulate to minimize the risk. But what the regulators seem to be doing is trying to eliminate the risk with drones, and that's totally impractical. We have to realize that there's going to be risk. There'll always be risk. The risk should be reduced to a level where the benefits are matched by the risk. And because the trouble is, of course, that the regulators, they don't see the hobby as important. They don't see individuals enjoying themselves. There's no value in that. So therefore, we don't need to worry about that. Well, drone deliveries, we have to regulate for that because we want to allow that. There's benefits to that. They don't see the huge benefits that flow from someone getting out there and having a good time on a Sunday afternoon. I mean, I know a lot of people, especially in the freestyle drone hobby, who have used this as a mental health thing. I mean, there's been people with quite significant mental health issues. They get a freestyle drone and it almost cures them. It makes a huge difference to their life, but that counts for nothing in the case of a regulator. For example, a lot of those people fly FPV freestyle and they fly alone without a spotter. They're breaking the rules. They have to break the rules to get what makes them better. And so the regulators just do not have any concept of what they are regulating, what the community is, the culture. They just see us as, just a part of aviation. But we're totally different to your pilot and his 172 flying around in the sky.
Yeah, but you see, again, I think that we are totally different to the pilot. Yes, absolutely. But we are also a very, very wide user base, from everybody that treats their drone the same way they do their cell phone, through to the enthusiast and then the professional operator. So I think finding the balance of regulation to suit all of that very wide user base, I think that's one of the challenges that regulators need to follow. And we keep saying regulators as a wide thing, and of course we do have now some separation. We're starting to see separation between regulators. It used to be everything the FAA did, everybody else would copy on and do. But now we are seeing differences in Canada. We're seeing differences here in the UK and the EU, etc., where the regulators are starting to go their own way.
That's interesting, because we all fly the same craft. We all use the same air. We all have the same factors involved, but the regulations are so different. So obviously, if the regulations were based on risk, they would be coherent and consistent right across the world, because everything is the same. So the fact that the regulations are so different, in Canada you can only fly this far from an airfield, in Australia it's some a different distance, in the UK it's a different distance. Surely if the risk was constant, the rules would be constant, but nobody has actually done the risk assessment. So we end up with these ad hoc rules based on supposition and assumptions. No one looks at the historical data. They pull stuff out of their backsides and say, well, this is the safe distance from an airport. In Australia, you can fly right up to the boundary of an airport, but not on the approach or departure path. Yet in New Zealand, you have to be 4K all the way around. It makes no sense. There's no consistency, which proves the regulators are not doing their jobs properly.
I mean, we are, and again, I don't, I am not an employee of the UK CAA. I would like to stress, but
but you're trying to carry some points, right?
Not at all. But yeah, we are starting to see movements from that side of things as well. The fact that we do now have, and I don't want to say UTM too loudly because that's a whole other debate, but we are now seeing the situation where we can go onto an app right now and we can book a flight within the FRZ of an aerodrome and get that digitally approved pretty quickly with Richard's company, Altitude Angel. And we're starting to see advances like that as well here. So I think there are several ways where we are in the UK, we are starting to not lead the way, but certainly go our own way from the point of view of allowing the sub 250 flights, that type of thing, and opening up even things like FRZs to hobbyist flyers, etc., through digital permissions. And I think that's going to open up a lot more of the of the skies, basically. And I think it's going in the right direction with things like Article 16 being sub 250, that type of thing. So, but again, I do feel like we need those regulations for the wider user base.
The problem I see with global regulation is we have this inconsistency of rules. Some countries have really good rules. Like in New Zealand, we have shielded operations. Fantastic idea. It completely eliminates all the hassles with airfields and things.
Yes.
But no one else is keen to adopt that because, we didn't invent that. We're going to lead the world with our drone rules, and everyone's saying we're going to lead the world, but they're not looking at what others are doing. Canada, no prescriptive rules, sub 250, and zero problems. But we can't do that. We've got to add all these rules to pile on top of it. Just because it works 100% somewhere doesn't mean we should adopt it. So they're all developing their ad hoc rule sets, which are all in conflict. It's like, no, it's seriously, you guys need to get together in a room, get a couple of pizzas and some beer and work this out. So there's consistent drone rules from country to country, and they reflect the risk of what we're doing.
I would support that. I would support there being some kind of global consortium of regulators that sit down and because again, everybody accepts that unmanned aviation is here to stay. Is something that we can monetize, that we can be successful from the commercial side of things. Because I do feel as well, and this is going slightly off topic from regulation per se, that because we don't have that kind of setup, because we don't have that kind of thinking, we've almost got a situation now where business is starting to dictate from the point of view. If you look at things like UTM and that type of thing, a lot of that and a lot of and of course it's going to have huge impacts on the unmanned sector. A lot of that is being driven by commercial companies rather than regulators. So regulators are kind of listening to these people. What are your ideas?
Exactly.
Okay, we could do that. We could do this way. And to me, that's the wrong way round. That we need to have these things in the hands of the regulator. Yes, okay, so let's say we have UTM here in the UK in place. Yes, awesome companies like Altitude Angel with Richard, etc. You can use their UTM service if you decide to, because that UTM service is being run to the regulation that's been set for UTMs. But you can also use X, Y, and Z, because also we then have competition and we won't have people paying for every single hobby flight and that type of thing. But I and then we have things like the drone prep issue where we have a company essentially selling the airspace above landowners properties, which they don't have the right to do, and it's essentially trying to regulate from that point of view. So no, I do agree with you. I think that a joined up thinking process would avoid the next step of regulation with UTM and everything else becoming a bit of a fuddle, basically.
Well, the real problem. We're suffering from what I call the Mars syndrome. Right now, we've got regulators and we've got politicians being told the skies will be filled with drones delivering things to your door and carrying stuff around. Go and look out your window. Can you see a drone? You can't see a drone, right?
Indeed.
And if you look back through all the past copies of the Popular Science, Popular Mechanics magazines, they were predicting that we'd have colonies on Mars by 2000 or by 1990. There'll be colonies of men on Mars. It's only a few years away. It's like nuclear fusion. It's only 10 years away. And so these people are being fed all these promises of all this wealth and prosperity going on. Nobody is smart enough to realize this is just rubbish. This is pie in the sky. This is, we're not going to have this. I mean, look at the history of Amazon and DHL, all the other drone delivery companies.
Oh yeah,
it's not.
Yeah.
We know this is not going to happen. So all these UTMs, all these rules and regulations designed to clear the space out for these, It is based on myth and misunderstanding, and basically it's fraud. It's fraud. We've got companies that have been collecting money from investors to make all these flying taxis and things. We are not going to see the skies. We have flying taxis. They're called helicopters. And if you look at the economics, just the economics of running an electric multi-rotor to carry people around, they do not stack up. They do not stack up because swappable batteries, I don't know. For as long as one of those things is sitting on the ground, it's losing money. It has to be flying all the time, and you can't do that if you've got to spend an hour charging
the economics.
Your battery.
The economics do not stack up. They don't add up. The most recent one was, in my opinion, the most laughable, and I never like to use that word with someone's commercial activity, but with the zipline one, I think it was with Walmart in the US, where they were using these, and what frustrated me here is they took the zipline concept, which in Africa and in remote locations in the world is amazing. To me, that is a brand that is delivering on its promise. It is getting vaccinations, medical supplies to areas where, entire countries that have 7 ambulances in the entire country, and these little fixed wing drones are parachuting in essential supplies of vaccinations, all sorts of things that people just would not be able to get within the time for those things to go off, etc. And you then suddenly see this fantastic system that I have a lot of respect for pop up in a Walmart PR video showing them with a fixed wing drone parachuting supplies into someone's garden from Walmart. And I just sort of sit there and think, this is my concern is that kind of pie in the sky, no probably pun intended, is actually holding up the real innovation in the sector and the real way that we could, and I say monetize in a good way, that we could commercialize the lower airspace. It's holding the true side of things up, in my opinion, because there's no way the Amazons, the super highway drone deliveries just cannot happen for a million reasons. But there'll
always be edge cases. There's always edge cases where drone delivery is practical, but they're very, very small sectors of the market, and I don't see that being. We're not going to have this drone delivery. In fact, the situation we have at the moment is somewhat akin to, Milton Keynes. They've got these little trolleys that trundle around the streets. Now imagine if the Council of Milton Keynes said, okay, pedestrians, you're not allowed to use the streets or the footpaths except under these conditions during these hours. You've got to walk on this little tiny strip and you've got to do that. Imagine if they changed all the rules for pedestrians because there were drone trundles delivering fish and chips through Milton Keynes. People would say, we're not having that. That's ridiculous. The footpaths are for people. Well, this is a situation we have with the hobby. The hobby's used this airspace. We've used it safely, responsibly for years or decades, I should say. Now we've got commercial interests coming in saying, oh, we want this cleared for our commercial drone deliveries, even though they'll never happen. But we need to, we're raking up all this investment capital, these huge amounts of millions of dollars going into our coffers. So we can say to our investors, oh, we can't give you a return on your investment yet because this space isn't clear. We need a UTM and so they're building up excuses why they haven't delivered. Oh, there's no UTM in place. Oh, we need to get these drones with remote ID. All these stuff are building up so they don't have to actually honor the promises they made to investors because it'll all fall apart. Once they actually have to deliver, no pun intended, they won't be able to. These companies will fold like houses of cards. It's going to be a complete and utter disaster.
And they are already doing that. You look at Amazon Air. Amazon Air Prime Air, whatever they want to call themselves, they are very quietly moving their staff well away from that project, and it is no longer. But bizarrely, in the UK press here, because of course they had a very large operation, a large operation for what they were trying to do here, and when they showed the photos, it was literally like a farmhouse and a football field with a couple of little circles in it where they were testing the drone taking off on a wire. It was a tethered drone that they were testing going backwards and forwards. You think that's not exactly. But then you look at some of the other commercial operations that are happening, like the Royal Mail tests here in the UK and that type of thing, delivering mail and medication to remote Scottish islands, etc.
Yeah.
Those things are actually working, but it's the Amazon thing that everyone thinks of when you think of drone delivery, unfortunately. So I do think that a lot of PR, which was very good PR for them as companies, has hurt the commercial sector from that point of view. But yeah, I agree that the next wave of regulation, UTM, that type of thing, that does need to be controlled by the the governments and the regulators,
but they're in the pockets of corporations. The dollars speak. We know that. Look at that in the USA. There's this drone advisory committee, even the new AAAC or whatever it is. How much representation does the hobby have on there? It's all filled with commercial operators, Boeing and Airbus and all these other commercial operators are having all the say, even though they're not using this airspace because they don't have products that they can ship. It's never going to happen. But they've been given full control because money. It's all about money. They forget that we are a hobby. We have a much. They're taxing the air we breathe. You can't do that.
Yeah, you see, and that's again that is one of the things that confuses me with the FAA model from the point of view of how they have all these committees feeding into the central thing, etc. Because there is the old thing of trying to agree something by committee does. In practicality, and I feel like the DJI Mavic 3, having flown one, was actually designed by committee. I feel like a committee of people stood around and said, "What does the Mavic 3 need to have in it?" And we ended up with a bit of a mismatch and a bit of a poor drone in my personal opinion. But then actually, previous drones, you feel like, okay, this was designed for a purpose by engineers, innovators, and they wanted this drone to do something. And I feel that way sometimes when I look at things like the Drone Advisory Committee and that type of thing over in the States, that it is something where you think, okay, and even actually if you did have that filled with hobbyists, does that actually go anywhere? Does the information that's talked about there, does it actually have an impact?
They have no role in making rules. They're not part of the rule-making process. And the thing about advisory committees is if they tell you something you wanted to hear, you'll latch onto it and say, oh, we're operating under the advice. But if they tell you something you don't want to hear, you ignore it. So they're completely pointless. They only serve to endorse decisions that have already been made.
Indeed, and it is one of those things where it is the public perception over in the States of it. Oh, the Drone Advisory Committee is a voice of X, Y, and Z. I'm not saying that people believe that for a second, but as you say, when you look in the fine print, it does say actually anything that's discussed here is that's all it is. It's a discussion, and we'll take the viewpoint. It's exactly the same as someone leaving the comments on the remote ID consultation in inverted commas, and it's just that it's information.
Yeah, in the USA, you can see how powerful the dollar is and how this is basically just all based on vested interests, because the FAA has been extremely clever. They've created this freer situation where if you're a community-based organization, you will be given special concession as long as you don't rattle a cage too much. So you've got the AMA, we're happy. They're not challenging these rules. You've got other groups like, the flight test community. They're not challenging the rules because they stand to benefit from it. Oh, you'll have to come and fly at our freer, and you'll have to pay for the privilege. So they've bought them off. The very groups that should be representing the hobbyists have been bought off by the regulators, and so the hobbyists are left going, what the hell?
Whereas you see, I feel like almost the opposite has happened here in the UK with things like FPV UK and the BMFA getting the Article 16. So I suppose when I look at regulations, drone rules, etc., and I see them fairly positively, I suppose I'm looking at them from the use case here in the UK. One of the things that actually scared me from a global point of view, and this genuinely scared me, was actually, and again, I'm not going to say I'm pro-regulation because I don't want more regulations, but I agree that regulation is required to a greater degree than you do, etc. But one of the things that scared me actually was the FAA administrator, one of his first sort of public addresses on remote ID and that type of thing. The first line of that talked about drone delivery, and again, as someone that believes in safe, responsible flying. As I say, I actually enjoy the UK drone rules from the point of view that I feel like it gives me a framework I can fly my drone within, and I promote the good side of that. I was sort of left like this a little bit, that the person that's the absolute pinnacle of the US drone regulation side of things would come out with a speech, and literally the first written line talks about the exciting future of drone delivery. Did
you watch or listen to the court submissions for the RDQ challenge to remote ID?
I watched US News's coverage of that.
Yeah. Did you hear how they were talking about sky full of drones? Basically, we need to do this because we're going to have the skies full of drones. Again, commercial drone delivery. It's not happening, people. They need to challenge that. But the thing also is, again, we come to this drones versus the hobby. Why? The hobby was operating very, very safely, responsibly for decades. Why do they need the rules that have been imposed upon them. They haven't done anything new. They haven't changed what they're doing. They have been completely the same for year after year, decade after decade. And suddenly now they got all this registration, all this stuff. There is no justification for imposing that on a group that hasn't changed its behavior or its accountability or anything. So that is one thing that you say the rules are better in the UK. For model flies, no, because they shouldn't have imposed those rules in the first place.
So would you support the current types of rules that we have here in the UK in terms of GPS camera drones? So if there was a line that says, okay, this side of things, the hobby, the RC, and I say RC in terms of what me and you would call RC, can carry on as they were, and of course, we do have those rules outside of their normal flying zones and that type of thing. But then the camera drones, because they can be literally Joe Blogs, which I was once. I was Joe Blogs that went and bought a camera drone from Argos. That we do need regulation for those people from the point of view of steering them on the straight and narrow. Is it that differential that you have more of the issue with, or just generally even for those new users, etc., that they just shouldn't need that level of regulation? So
how regulated are paragliders in the UK?
Next question.
I make my point. I mean, someone in a paraglider is several orders of magnitude, a couple of orders of magnitude heavier than someone flying a drone. And it's like, why are you allowing the greater risk with that? Because sure, there's always going to be some people who do stupid things with drones, but the rules will not stop them from doing that. We've already seen that. People break the rules if they choose to. Mm-hmm. You can make all the rules you want, they just break them. So what we've got to do is make them personally responsible and educate them. And rules do neither.
But where I feel like the rules have done in this country is, as I say, from the point of view of new users coming into it, finding out that there are rules, because at some point in there, they'll see these drones on YouTube. They'll have a friend that flies one, that type of thing. That's amazing. They have this amazing buzz, and they want to go and they want to capture some amazing pictures as well. And at some point in their journey of buying one and going out to fly, hopefully even with a leaflet in the box or something, they'll find out there are rules they need to stick to, and then they go down that route. I do think that you have to have that level of regulation and the follow-up, the fact that actually if you do break that rule, X, Y, and Z is going to happen to you for the wider user. And I'm not necessarily even talking about the people watching tonight, because they're into these things enough to come and listen to us ramble on about them, but the wider users, I do feel like that you do need that level of regulation.
What if you just had a big card in the box that said, I understand that if I damage third-party property or I injure or kill somebody, I will be held personally responsible, sign here. Wouldn't that be a sobering thing to do?
It would, and I do not disagree with that. I think accountability is 100% something that needs to be there. I actually feel like before a drone can be turned on or even purchased, that type of thing, that they should have to pass either the trust or the flyer ID test here in the UK, that type of thing. I think that there should be a basic level. So I think we would both like to see the same outcome, i.e. these new users being responsible and safe, but perhaps we disagree with the level of intrusion needed.
Yeah, these exams are interesting. These exams are interesting. They're supposed to educate, but there's no way that some guy doesn't get his friend to do it or whatever. There's no policing like that. You can't not pass it. You can do it as many times as you like. And what happens when the rules change? And suddenly one set of rules, and now do you have to go and reset the test to be re-educated? And it's like the road code. I know so many people driving cars today who sat their theory test when they got their license 30 years ago. They don't have a clue what the rules are now. They got miles out. So these things they have a degree of effect, but I don't think they're the most effective way to do these things. I think there's better ways to do it. And so the trouble is that regulators are inherently, like most people, lazy. They want to take the shortest route. They want to be seen to be doing something, even if it's not really the best way to do it. I think they just need to rocket up the backside and make the regulators accountable. Okay, show us the risks. Show us what you've done to manage the risks. Let's look, we've been doing this for a year. Show us the report that says this management strategy has been successful or it hasn't been. Self-analyze. Don't just keep coming up with more rules and changing them around just to suit the pressure of the people with the big wallets. This is a far too serious thing to be just dealt with by people who have never even done what we do. Seriously, I would not have the woman who makes the tea at the hospital writing a book on brain surgery, but that's exactly what. But again,
I'm saying this not as a salesman of the UK CAA. I do enjoy the fact that when we do speak to people in the UK, we had Jonathan Nicholson on a couple of times recently. He is a flyer himself, and understands it and that type of thing. So actually, and again, that's perhaps why we're now seeing more of the UK CAA on shows like Geeksvana and things like that, because they're people that are able to hold a conversation. I don't feel like necessarily, for instance, the famous FAA live stream where they discussed if you get attacked because someone knows your location, call the police. I don't know whether or not you'd ever find those kinds of representatives on live shows answering straight questions, etc. I know you've tried to get the New Zealand CAA to come on and even pre-recorded so you can edit it, etc., and that type of thing, to have chats with you and have.
They called the police.
Tumbleweed.
Yes. When I invited the CAA to come down and see what we're doing, they called the police. They took it as a threat. But actually, to be fair with New Zealand CAA, there's been a change of leadership. There's been a new guy put at the top, and they have dramatically changed their attitude. They're far more pragmatic. His initial statement was, we're not going to be pursuing the technical breaches. We're going to be dealing with safety. And that was a breath of fresh air. And since then, I'm sure there's been many complaints about me, but I haven't heard a peep from the CAA.
Excellent.
But another interesting thing is that when it comes to drone registration in New Zealand, the CAA said, we don't think it's necessary. We don't think it's going to pay any, there's no point on it. It's not going to serve any purpose. And so the government said, okay, CAA, we'll give this problem to the Department of Transport because we've got more control over them than we have of you. So the Department of Transport's now responsible for making those rules. The CAA is simply the enforcement arm. So when they don't get what they want, the politicians who are being lobbied by the big wallets will just simply move the ball into someone else's court where they can get what they want. So I think sometimes we unfairly blame the regulators, because the regulators are not always actually the regulators. The rules come from higher up, Department of Transport, Indeed,
which is actually one of the clarifications we got on the sea label thing in the end, where the UK CAA's turned around and said, actually, the sea labels do exist as far as we're concerned. The standards are there, but the DFT haven't actually appointed a standards body yet, so it actually isn't their fault. So everyone was like, come on CAA, where are our sea labels? When actually there's nothing. Even if they wanted to, there is nothing more they can do. But I understand what you mean, and I also welcomed the fact that the UK CAA actually went from having a drone department in there to actually now it's all one CAA essentially as an RPAS unit. They're in with the manned guys now, so actually there's perhaps a little bit more understanding across that fence, if that makes sense. Because I don't think that you can make these rules, especially if we're talking about having these unified traffic management systems and unified skies. I don't think you should have one department saying, oh, we think we should do this, and then it being sent off to another department saying, oh, no, we should do this. And again, we're going to get rule by committee there, where we haven't got the rules that are effective. We've got the rules that a committee of people would agree on, basically. So no, I do agree with you from that point of view. Where do you feel like we're going from the point of view of drone rules? Because we have what I think we both agree in terms of the US and the FAA is very much the bureaucratic approach that isn't necessarily going in the right direction. I feel like here in the UK we're going in the right direction. It sounds like New Zealand might be changing. Certainly Canada can be celebrated a small amount for the amount of accountability that they're handing back. Where do you think, not necessarily fear or hope, but where do you think we're going in the next 5-10 years?
Well, we've seen a knee-jerk reaction to a perceived risk, driven largely by commercial entities and the media. And I think at some stage we're going to see it's going to scale back, like it's done in the UK, like they've done in Canada. I think in Canada it was 9 miles from an airport or something ridiculous. They're scaling that back because they realise that they're starting to look a bit stupid, regulating for a risk that is nowhere near as great as they claimed it was in the first instance. So I think we'll see a scaling back of the regulations. Unfortunately, it's going to take time, and I fear that the damage that is done to the hobby in the interim will take a long time to repair. And that's my real concern, is that you guys are, and it is laziness. I'll say that they're just lazy. They could come out and, like when I invited them down, come on down. No, we're not going to. They like drinking their coffee, eating their biscuits, and enjoying the warm creature comforts in the middle of winter. They're not going to go out of their way for anybody. So I think we will see a scaling back of regulation. It has to happen because they just look stupid otherwise. And also, when we see this massive increase in delivery drones not happening, then the justification for the regulation, which they've said is safety but really is economic imperative, imperative, that will no longer be there. So then there'll be a consequent winding back. Although one thing you've got to remember is that once a regulator or a government has seized a certain power, they're very reluctant to give it up, especially if there's money involved. Remember, you guys are paying £9 a year or something, are you? In Australia, it's going to be, they reckon $40 a drone in Australia. It's a moneymaker.
Okay, we haven't even got onto that, and yes, thank you. That's I agree. I think there will be a further scaling back as essentially the justification can no longer be offered. You can only throw those reasons at a wall and them not stick, and people not say, "Hang on a minute," for so long. But what is happening in Australia? What kind of twilight zone have they seemed to enter into on regulation?
Well, CASA used to be one of the best regulators in the world, and I congratulated them on it. Since then, I don't know, because we've got Google. Remember, Google's running their Google Wing thing in Australia. I think they have a lot of sway with the regulators, an awful lot of sway, because Google's plan is not to deliver stuff by drone. They're not in the business of delivering stuff. They want to run a UTM. So they've already got an app in Australia, and they want to say, we've been doing drone deliveries for 3 years, so our UTM has got to be the best. None of the others can claim that. That's going to be their tax. So this is just money for Google, and they've been able to convince regulators over there to tighten up the screws. So, and they see, because they want to introduce so much new infrastructure, they're going to recover it from the user base, which is via drone registrations. And of course, 85%, or over 85% of all the drones in Australia are recreational. So the poor recreational users are going to really cop it in the neck. And if you're under 16, well, you might as well not think about joining the hobby unless you've got an adult who...
It is also per drone, isn't it? It's $40 per.
Yeah, it's per drone. Well, they say that they haven't set the price yet, but people have calculated, crunched the numbers, because they've got to recover about $26 million or something. They've looked at the number of drones out there. Yeah, and so, but if again, they're blocking children from the hobby. You cannot register your drone unless you're 16 years or over. So you're getting an adult to register on your behalf. And the problem is there are a lot of young families, solo mothers, they don't have the money or the time to do that. And when they look at the risk, possible fines,
despite that they will not look at a piece of paper that says you could have XYZ happen to you and think, oh, little Johnny will be responsible, or actually little Johnny's Mini 2, there's no way that can damage anything. Karen, there are obviously going to be the parents that do that, but the vast majority are going to say, actually, I need to find the $600 to service my car next month. I'm not about to risk a $10,000 fine or something so that little Johnny can fly his drone. So no, I do agree with you. And they've also effectively over there, it's effectively banning FPV at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah.
With
you cannot fly FPV, and can't fly FPV unless you're on a CASA approved flying field, which is like the model clubs, or you have a special exemption to do so. So no going down the park and flying, all that sort of stuff. And it's like they seem to have this, and they were regulating indoor activity. They were the only regulator in the world to regulate indoor activity. In their latest update, they've said, well, we might not do that anymore. I thought, seriously, what were you doing it in the first place? I mean, that's as I say, these people are so out of touch with reality, driven by commercial imperative.
No, indeed, and it is. I hope we see scaling back from that point of view, because obviously, Oz by Drone and all of our Aussie friends, we don't want to see these people leave the hobby, and that is what starts to happen. I know of one of my probably previous viewers now, because he's no longer in the drone hobby, and you were saying it before about the benefits he can have. He was a veteran with PTSD, and flying his drone, it was only a camera drone, it wasn't sort of this skillfully FPVing, but getting out of his house, planning where to go, doing this, etc. And he actually felt like he's in the US, and it literally, he feels like, and it cured him essentially. It changed his entire way of thinking, and he was so much more positive about things, and it helped him hugely. But he feels like he was chased out of the hobby, basically. So I don't want to see that kind of thing happening in the future. And yes, I feel like we're going in the right direction here in the UK, but it concerns me when I see regulators that do things like that, like banning FPV and even talking about regulating indoor airspace, which is just I can't even fathom how you could justify that personally. But as you say, you bring the dollar sign into it, frankly. And unfortunately, for all of the PR that Google are getting for their drone delivery trials down in Australia, that one bird is probably doing more damage for the entire drone delivery side of things.
I heard from a guy that lives in Australia, there was a Google drone delivery going on next door, and a boy came out of a house with a fishing line and a fishing rod, did a surf cast and brought the drone down.
Wow, that's incredible.
They haven't mentioned that for some reason.
Indeed. And there was also the trials in Canberra were actually cancelled because of noise complaints.
Yeah.
And it was literally, wasn't it something like 4 days after they started? They literally had to stop immediately to say, no, sorry, we've just had too many noise complaints. You're not doing
it. And if I can't fly this over my neighbour's property, how can Google fly a great big drone with hot coffee that could scold you over the same place?
Yeah, and we all know that the other thing, we talk about and we smile about the chap with the kid with the fishing line and the bird attacking the drone, but actually they are substantial aircraft, and if they came down, that is actually a significant issue for anybody close to that on the ground. Also,
this
from
is what I say,
distraction point of view, not just the thing physically hitting you.
But a lot of the regulations seem to be based on the fact that, we're regulating commercial drones. They don't realize the hobby is a totally different risk profile, and that's what I say. We just need to stand up and say, in a democracy, shouldn't it be majority rule? If we're 85% of the activity, why don't we get 85% of the vote?
Exactly. And that is also the case, which I've heard you argue from the point of view of the manned versus unmanned side of things, that of course there is so much more future use of unmanned and even just current users that it shouldn't be. We shouldn't be the child in the corner, basically, that sort of, where the big sort of manned aviation come in and say, this is how you use the airspace, and if we want your airspace, we'll take it, type thing. It's sort of, when in actual fact, we're the future of the economy from that point of view, because not just with COVID and everything else like that, manned aviation has its future issues, shall we say, for sure.
The big problem we have, though, as a community is we're not a community. We are a group. We're a community of individuals. There's no cohesion. I've tried on a number of occasions to get cohesion. Look at Dan with FPV Freedom Coalition in the USA. I go to their public forum, their meetings and things. This is a tiny handful of people. You'd think that this was there was only 12 people in the entire USA that flew FPV. We tend to be very introspective, and we don't really think much about the big picture. And I want to change that. Every time I go out flying FPV, even in these times of COVID, fortunately we don't have much of a problem here, I carry a spare set of passenger goggles. And the number of people that have come up to me a little bit Karenish, and I've said, hey, look, put these on, have a look. And oh wow, how can I get one of these? It changes their whole perspective once they've seen that this is, I can't identify that person who's 30 meters away because the camera doesn't do that. And wow, this is just like flying in a dream. These things, once we educate the public, and I think next year one of my key focuses is going to be on educating the public, because politicians respond to only two things: lobbyist dollars and votes. And if we can get the public to come on our side and we say, look, would you rather have your kid sitting in your basement with a crypto mining PC putting ransomware on some business somewhere, or would you rather have them out in the fresh air learning skills that they can use in their career later on, and getting fit and healthy? We got to swing back, because the hobby used to be like that. In the USA in the 1930s and 40s, the hobby was heavily sponsored by the motor industry. I think it was Plymouth sponsored the US Nationals, model airplane nationals in the USA. There was it was such a fantastically positive thing that companies were lining up to sponsor it. Now we're seen as a pariah because the media has changed that. And also we need to get ourselves together. Every time I see a story that vilifies drones, I reply to that and I call them on that. See that thing I did with I called them out on their own ethics. They have an own ethics statement on scripts.
Yes.
And they wouldn't even respond. That shows you that
crazy
bullshit. Yeah, it's bullshit. They should be
as a registered member of the press here in the UK, I was appalled at the response, the lack of response that you got from literally a member of the public should be able to write to them and say, this is on your ethics. I don't feel this story has met those levels, and someone in that organization should be very, very worried about that and running around trying to find out what happened, at least looking into it and coming back to you. Absolutely, yeah, that absolutely blew my mind. And I know what you mean from the point of view of the community coming together, because it's things like when there were the submissions for remote ID, perhaps the numbers were a bit lower. There was a consultation here in the UK and the numbers were incredibly low as far as people that actually took the time to go and actually make comments and put their name on it. And even things like the race day quads, when that was live, there's a few dozen people watching, but actually if that live stream was live and there was 20,000 people watching that, 10,000 people watching that, even that would make regulators sit up and think, actually, there's a lot of interest on this. There's a lot of focus on this. And I don't think people realize actually how much their eyes and how much their involvement and how much their putting their public backing on something actually does have an impact with these people at some point if you have the large enough numbers. And I know you've tried to start groups before and that type of thing, as far as being able to speak on behalf of hobbies and etc. And yeah, it is a very hard thing to do, because I find that once an organization gets to a certain size as well, it then also just becomes another committee. Like the AMA and even like things like the UK BMFA, it isn't really, it's representative of the hobby here, but it doesn't really have any teeth or any power or anything else like that. From, you know, the regulator here could annoy the BMFA, and there's not really much the BMFA could do about it, essentially, because it isn't organised enough in those terms. So no, I do agree with you, sadly.
Yeah, and as I say, the regulators are very clever. They're buying off most of these national bodies. Like in Australia, if you're on a CASA-approved flying field, which is the MAAA, and their national bodies get this special status, and it's in Canada, it's the MAAC or whatever it is, they get special privilege. A BMFA gets special privilege. AMA gets special privilege. By doing that, they think, oh, we can buy these organisations off. But they fail to appreciate that the hobby has changed a lot. Back when I was young, everybody that flew model aircraft joined a club and flew at a flying field. These days, kids are buying stuff online, flying at a local park. And so they're not members of clubs and groups. So they're the ones that are disadvantaged. When I started, I wasn't a member of a club. It's the very entry into the hobby that's being disadvantaged, which is pushing people out. We're not going to have the inflow. And already this hobby, the traditional model flying hobby, was graying out really badly until people like Banggood and Hobby King came along, and suddenly all the stuff was super cheap. We had a new surge of entries into the hobby. But now they're starting to age on, and there's not much new stuff, no new people coming in from below. It's too risky, it's too expensive, it's too complicated.
I'm one of the youngest people in my flying club. We actually we do have
so am I.
We do have 3 or 4 younger than me. I mean, I'm in my 40s, and that's a real shame. We do have a few younger than me, and actually, when those chaps are at the flying field, I'm sort of, it sort of takes me back a little bit. It's sort of, that's actually somebody quite young in the hobby, which is a shame, because these clubs should be full of people. You know, if you actually explain to most young people what happens at these clubs, I think they'd be very excited about it personally. But just very quickly, Chris Hearn, thank you for your super sticker there. I really appreciate it. Chris Hearn, 3D old dude. There you go. I'm thinking he might do some 3D printing.
The problem with clubs, though, now is that the whole world has become more urbanized. And whereas when I was a kid, I could jump on my bicycle and I could cycle for 30 minutes and get to the local club flying field. It's not practical for many people in an urban environment now. It's hours to get to a flying field. And if you're a kid and you don't have mum to drive you, and there's not going to be any public transport, you're stuck. The only place you can fly is at the schoolyard or at the park. And if that's becoming illegal or whatever, then the door to the hobby is closed for you.
Okay, so we'll move towards winding things up there. I think. What have we learned tonight? I think it's. I haven't particularly learned anything new personally, apart from reinforcing. I had a suspicion that our core aims were a lot more aligned than perhaps many people would think they are. But perhaps our thought process of how to achieve those core aims are very, very different, which is probably what I thought of. But one of the things
interesting, just if I can interrupt you for a moment.
Of course.
I look at a lot of people, they say, we'll work with the regulator. We'll work with the regulator to change things. This is how even the FPV Freedom Coalition, we're going to work with the regulator to change things. That has been tried for so long, and it's failed, apart from Simon Dale with the FPV UK. I mean, that's one good example where it's worked. But
flying the British flag, yes.
Every other theatre of engagement, it has failed abysmally. No one is prepared to stand up and say, no, I'm sorry, we're not having that. We refuse to accept these overbearing, over-regulations that we're not going to have.
Do you think it's the approach? Do you think it's the style of approach, though? Do you think it's that there is something very precise about, and it might just be Simon Dale is the one guy in the entire world that is this way, but I refuse to believe that, because there must be other passionate people around, people like yourself, you know. But just the way that it's been approached and the way that it's been gained, it's been very, very precise and very focused in on what they want to achieve. And that, again, I think is possibly maybe because that is Simon Dale doing it. It's an individual passionately approaching something. Although he's FPV UK, etc., he doesn't run that thing as a for profit business. He's certainly not in any of the things he does in the hobby for profit. And I wonder if that's the slant. If we've got even the wrong people with the things like the AMA and BMFA and that type of thing, we've got the wrong people set up in the wrong way, that actually these committees sit around now talking about how to run that organization, and how to not make money from it, etc. But what's next year's fee going to be, and what does that fee get you when you get all X, Y, and Z? When actually what they should be doing are things like the FPV UK, and I know BMFA were involved in the Article 16 as well, so I don't want to diminish their success there as well. But I do wonder if a lot of these organizations, well, are not even trying, frankly, or are just approaching things in the wrong way. This whole battle of committee versus committee, I just don't think works.
Yeah, ultimately it boils down to people, and all the engagements I've had with various bureaucracies, it is ultimately people that determine whether things succeed or fail. And for example, I've been dealing years ago, I was dealing with people in CAA who were just, you couldn't deal with them. They were not open to any suggestion. That was it, door closed. Don't you know who we are? We're the CAA. You don't count for anything. We're not listening to you. Those people become very difficult to deal with. Then you have a change of guard, and things can change dramatically. The rules are the same, the policies are the same, procedures are the same, but the people make all the difference. Now, I think you've probably been very lucky, and you've got Simon, who is obviously a pretty diplomatic and convincing kind of guy, and he's been dealing with people in CAA who are open to listen, and that's a very unique congruence of situations. I think in the USA you have the AMA, which has been traditionally, I mean, look at what Rich was doing, the head of the AMA. He was snoozing through the meetings. That's the kind of attitude. They're basically a very, very old group of people who just want to go on Sunday and fly around in a circle over a grassy paddock. Nothing in them for jockeying or challenging the rules.
Yeah, and you do feel like they almost feel like they're kind of, again, I hate being disparaging about people, but the overall feeling I'm left with is it's almost like a country club, and they want to keep their membership. Whereas you get here in the UK people like Simon Dale, etc., that actually achieve things. And obviously he had his Airprox board where they even challenge drone versus aircraft sightings, etc., that type of thing. And again, it's actually doing something. It actually has a result in mind that's focused towards helping the hobby and the commercial side of things. There's a healthy hobby, a healthy commerce as well, frankly. And I don't, as you were just saying, I don't see that with things like the AMA, etc., because they do just almost seem to be, well, I'd like to keep my membership in the club, which is a concern.
And of course, the AMA's responsibility is to look after the AMA, not to look after the hobby. They have no responsibility to the greater hobby. It's only to their members. And if their members are all retired and fly nitro trainers around grassy fields, as long as the rule changes don't directly affect them, they're not going to be concerned, not going to kick up a stink or make an argument. So that's why we need new groups. But unfortunately, younger people tend to be more focused on what they're doing, not the bigger picture. So that's why we don't have the same kind of grouping that the older flyers do with the AMA and the BMFA. Young people, social media, let's get together, fly at the park. We're not part of a formal group. We don't, we haven't got time for this. And so that's our big weakness. And I don't see a way around that. We have to look at some other tech to recover our lost ground. And I think that is the public. We can convince the public what we're doing is safe. It is wholesome. It is something that should be enjoyed, and the kids should be promoted into doing this. Then they put pressure on politicians, and then things start to change.
Because we should be able to have these kind of debates, so these kind of healthy debates like we've had this evening, and actually lead somewhere. So actually have some kind of solution and some kind of format. And actually, I feel like there's a middle ground between our two arguments that would make a lot of sense, even to regulators. But we need to find a way of presenting that with power of the backing of numbers. But again, as I say, I know so many people have tried and failed in the past. And frankly, if Bruce at XJet can't motivate people to join a club and join a Facebook group, frankly, then I'm not sure many people can.
Well, one of the key things is moderation in all things, especially moderation, but also good cop, bad cop. I mean, that's one thing. We need people who are going to be right and tight with the regulators, because that level of connection is important. But we also need people who are going to stand up and say, no, we're not having this, because then the regulators realize we're going to find some middle ground.
Yes.
Whereas if you only have people cozying up to them, they go, we'll do what we like. So I play an important role. I may not get anything done, but I'm going to hopefully change the perspective of the regulator a little bit to realize that there are people out there who are not happy with what we're doing and are prepared to stand up and talk about it.
Well, one of the things that I have thrown at me often from viewers, contacts, and all sorts of people is, have you heard what XJet said? And to me, that's a positive from the point of view that people are asking me to go and listen to another point of view, and it means they've also listened to that point of view as well, and that perhaps somewhere along the lines we'll remember that you know, most of the operators, most of the users of in the hobby are somewhere, you know, in the middle there. So on certain parts of the subject there'll be this side and that side, etc., but there's this huge middle ground of opinion where a lot of us agree about a lot of things a lot more, but just not perhaps on how to get there or how that should be regulated. But again, if we had an effective organization, perhaps that's something we could work on, frankly. So
yeah, well, this year's going to be very interesting, certainly in New Zealand. I think they're going to try and bring in registration, and this old man's going to go to jail if he needs to, because the point needs to be made. If you want to put old man in jail for flying his toys in his backyard, well, you know, ultimately the courts will be the ultimate arbiter of whether the regulations are just.
Yeah.
And
I cannot tell you how many conversations I've had with experts in the field, and go back and watch all the interviews on Geeksvana with people who are ex-CAA, CAA, all sorts of people in the industry. And the answer I always get when I say, you know, what about this? Well, it hasn't been tested in court. This hasn't been testing, that hasn't, and that's a lot of our regulation is like that. And yeah, I mean, you know, that is one way one way to very much stand up and be counted is I'm going to go test it in court. So yeah, I respect that.
And I think that's one of the things that's protected me in the past from the attentions of CAA, is because there are some things that they do not want to take to court because they are not confident they would win. And if a precedent is set, it significantly disempowers them.
Especially a very public precedent as well. So yeah, indeed. Well, Bruce, thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming along this evening and having a chat with us. It's something that I've wanted to do for a while, and it's something that I will definitely do again if you're up for it in the future, because I think it is always, because again, I'm aware that my audience, because of the type of videos I put out, my audience are probably people looking to follow the rules an awful lot. So I think exposing them a little bit to xjet is a good thing from that point. If you know what I mean, from the point of view that I feel like I'm pro the rules in the UK at the moment, but if I refuse to have those views open to scrutiny, then they're not really views. They're just, you know, it is just a mantra that I'm no, follow the rules. We have to have these open conversations. And there's people like Jason, GMI Visuals in the chat, who I often have debates with in the comments and in chat, etc., about all sorts of things, from beyond visual line of sight to flying in fog and everything else like that. And I enjoy having that, because I feel like if your views can't stand up to any kind of scrutiny, then, you know, that you haven't really based them on anything solid, frankly. So as I say, I appreciate you coming along this evening.
No worries, man. Anytime.
Excellent. Well, thank you everybody for watching. It is, believe it or not, it is the 23rd of December, which is absolutely crazy. So yes, as Bruce is saying, Merry Christmas to you all. Enjoy yourselves. I do actually have another couple of videos. I think I'm going to have
Southern Hemisphere for my Southern Hemisphere
viewers. Yes.
Yeah, there we go.
Superb. I do have a couple of other videos coming out, possibly one tomorrow, certainly one on Christmas Day, and then we're live again on the 30th. For the end of the year show, which is going to be an in-studio one, myself, Olive and Andrew, all in the studio here, COVID rules allowing, and we're going to be looking at a very unique year that 2021 has been for so many reasons, and having a bit of fun. We're even going to dress up a little bit, which is
don't forget scary. We're 13 hours ahead of you down here in New Zealand, so if you want to know what 2022 is like, just drop me a line.
Exactly.
I'll let you know in advance.
You can send me the lottery numbers. That old joke. Excellent. Well, thank you, Bruce. Thank you, everybody. And we'll see you next time on Geeksvana Live.
talking, and I need more of a show right now. It's time that you made your mind up, 'cause lately all it ever does is change. Feels like we're only talking, going round and around, back around. I will fight like no other every day. I won't stop like the others.